Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Sholts. I'm a biological anthropologist, and I'm the curator of the exhibit Outbreaks, Epidemics in the Connected World at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. I'm not there right now. I am joining you all today from my home in Washington, D.C. On behalf of our museum, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second program of our three-part series, AIDS at the Intersection of Community, Science, and Policy. This is how we are observing World AIDS Day this year. It's such a special event for us on the Outbreak team. And this series will continue tomorrow at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And so I hope that you can tune in then as well. For more than 2 years, the Outbreak exhibit has an associated programming, has been educating the public about viruses that spill over to people from other animals, about pandemic threats, and about the interconnectedness of human, animal, and environmental health as one health. I would like to take this moment to say thank you. Thank you so much to the many organizations and individuals who have supported the exhibit through all those years, including those who provided our funding. When the Outbreak exhibit reopens to the public, as it's been temporarily closed since March, there will be updates about COVID-19. They're going to be among the stories of other epidemics and pandemic diseases that we feature in the show. HIV has been and will remain at the center of the exhibit. But despite all the people and perspectives and experiences that we try really hard to represent in that content, there are far more stories than we have space to tell. And so that's why programs like this one have been so critical for expanding our ability to bring more faces and voices and findings into the conversation. So today we're going to hear from 2 physician scientists who have dedicated their careers to combating HIV. After their presentations, they are going to answer a few questions from me and then questions from you, our audience. So if you haven't already, please note that that Q&A box that I mentioned, that's where we'll be communicating with you throughout the program. We're going to be posting links in there as they come up in the discussion, and that's where you can write out your questions for our speakers to be asked by me. And so please take a moment to locate the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or the bottom of your screen. And so you'll type in your questions there, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can once we get to that Q&A section of our program. We're also pleased to be offering this program with closed captioning. And so if you want to turn those on, you click the CC button, and then you select Show Subtitles. And you use that same menu if you want to turn those captions off. And so that button, that CC button, that should be located at the top or the bottom of your screen. Okay, so now let's get started. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Bob Yarchoan. Bob is Dr. Robert Yarchoan. Who, Bob, you can turn on your video if you like, is a physician researcher who has made major contributions to developing therapies for AIDS and AIDS-related malignancies. He is a principal investigator at the National Cancer Institute and also oversees AIDS research throughout the NCI as director of the Office of HIV and AIDS Malignancy. Along with 2 colleagues, he developed the first 3 AIDS drugs, AZT, diagnostic, sorry about the mispronunciation here, and zalcitabine. I should have checked the pronunciation before I started. And he conducted the first clinical trials of combination anti-HIV therapy. He then turned to focus on the AIDS cancers. His laboratory and clinical studies have helped understand the biology of these cancers and led to the approval of 2 of the 3 main drugs used to treat Kaposi sarcoma, as well as treatments for certain rare AIDS cancers. Bob received his BA from Amherst College and his MD from the University of Pennsylvania. He trained in internal medicine at the University of Minnesota and immunology in the NCI. He's published more than 330 scientific papers and is co-inventor on 12 US patents. Among other honors, he's been inducted as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, and was a recipient of the first NIH World AIDS Day Award. Bob, it's such an honor. Thank you so much. Welcome, and please take it away.
Well, thank you. And it's an honor for me to be talking at the Smithsonian here. As Sabrina mentioned, I've spent really my whole career working in AIDS. I came to the NIH to study immunology and immunodeficiency diseases. Next slide. And after I was there just a short time, the CDC published a report of a few cases of an unusual pneumonia, pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, that normally occurs in immunosuppressed people, but were occurring in otherwise healthy individuals who were either injection drug users or gay men. And they had a sense that there was something new here, and this was the first harbinger of AIDS. And soon afterwards, it was discovered that the same group of people were developing Kassaye sarcoma, which was hitherto a very rare tumor. Next, please. So unlike the current pandemic, it really took a while for people to realize that there was something really remarkable happening here. This is an article in the New York Times a few months after these few cases. And as you can see, this report is sort of buried in the middle of the newspaper, along with an article about a contractor for a cargo plane. And next slide. And even 2 years later, when there were over 3,000 cases in the country and over 1,000 deaths, it was still really viewed as a relatively rare disease. And I think in retrospect, one of the reasons was that it was really focused on marginalized populations, injection drug users or gay men. Next slide. But in spite of this, there was a concern that this was a potentially growing problem and could spread to the rest of the population. And medical researchers around the world were eager to try to find what the cause of this was to understand it. And in 1983, Luc Montagnier identified a virus that we now know as HIV-1. Bob Gallo co-discovered the virus and was able to show that this was, I am sorry about this, that this was the cause of AIDS. And he developed a blood test in which he could identify antibodies to it. And he found that almost all people with AIDS had positive antibodies, but he also found that people in these risk groups had between 25 and 60% positivity. And when I read this article, I just had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, because what I realized is that 250,000 to 500,000 Americans were infected with this virus, which was a lethal virus, and we had no treatment for it, and were likely to go on to die, and they didn't know about it, that this virus had really infiltrated the country. Next slide. So at the time that the virus was discovered, there was a lot of enthusiasm that this would quickly lead to a vaccine. This is a report from the New York Times about that time. And they predicted that it would be ready in about 2 years. Well, unfortunately, it's now 35 years later. We still don't have a vaccine against HIV, but fortunately, we do have effective therapies. Next slide. So literally the day that the virus was announced, I had joined up to do research in AIDS with Sam Broder and Hiroki Matsuya, and we turned our attention to try to identify therapies for this. We were aware of the large number of people infected with the virus, and we thought that this was the area that we wanted to focus our attention. At the time, many people were highly skeptical of this. There are a number of reasons to think that it couldn't be developed. HIV undergoes reverse transcription and integrates into cellular DNA, and they thought it was therefore not amenable to therapy. There was little success in developing any antiviral therapy. HIV only has 9 genes and few targets of attack. There is this belief that a lot of the immunologic damage was just secondary and that it might not be reversible. Next slide. But we pushed on and obtained drugs from a number of sources, looked in the literature, and made the observation that if you modified the building blocks of DNA in a very slight way, you could convert them to drugs that were effective against AIDS. On the upper left on this slide is the structure of thymidine, one of the 4 building blocks of DNA. And you can see in red in the 3' position, there's a hydroxy group. If this is replaced by an azido group, you get the drug AZT, and this was highly effective. And again, it forms chains through the hydroxy group, And because of this change, it couldn't form any chains and reverse transcription couldn't occur. And then DDI and DDC, the next two drugs, have high hydrogens there. And then shown are two other drugs that were similarly developed. Next slide. The first one that we put into trial was AZT. We'd gotten the drug to test from Burroughs Wellcome. They had already done animal toxicity because they were interested in it as a possible antibiotic, so we could move it into trial quickly. And in July of 1985, we treated the first patient, and shown here is the data from that patient. The hallmark of AIDS is that the CD4 or helper T cells are attacked and decline. And as can be seen in the graph on the top, there is a pretty dramatic increase in the CD4 cells in this patient. And also his immune system had been compromised to the extent that he couldn't mount a skin test reaction to PPD, which he'd been exposed to. And as can be seen after a few weeks on AZT, he was able to mount a positive skin test. So in other words, the T cells were working. Next slide. As we treated other patients, we found, particularly at higher doses, as seen here, that we had consistent increases in the CD4 cells. And this was quite encouraging to us. And we had some other signs that it might be working. But this wasn't enough to really move it into practice. Next slide. But based on this, Burroughs Wellcome organized a randomized placebo-controlled trial. Half the patients got AZT, half of them got a placebo or a sugar pill. And as you can see here, over about 6 months or so, there were substantially more events in the patients that got placebo than those that got AZT. And this convinced the FDA that this was an effective drug, and it was approved in March of 1987, which was only 25 months after the demonstration of its in vitro activity or activity in the laboratory. And I think until that time, it was an indoor track record for drug development. Next slide. So this generated a lot of enthusiasm. About this time, the White House began to recognize that AIDS was a major problem. Ronald Reagan, as seen here, came and visited our laboratory, and there was a fair amount of enthusiasm. But as we continued to treat people with AZT, what we observed is that although the CD4 counts increased, they then decreased because resistance was developing, and it was not a cure. Next slide. And as the months and years dragged on, people infected with HIV became increasingly frustrated. And AIDS activism, which was the subject of the talks yesterday, really sort of developed. This was some pictures from a demonstration at the NIH before we had walls all around after 9/11. And they were really pushing the researchers to try harder. And although they were demonstrating at the NIH, I think there was a sense that we were really working towards a common enemy. And over the years, there was a real sort of kinship and collegiality that developed between the activists and the researchers in this area. Next slide. And over the next few years, there were some good things that occurred. One of the ones was that AZT was shown, as seen here, to block the transmission of HIV from mother to child at the time of birth. And as you can see, there's substantially more transmission when a placebo was given than AZT. And as a result of this, HIV has been almost completely eradicated in AIDS in infants in the United States. Next slide. And then over the next few years, we developed DDI and then DDC, and we became able to use combination therapy. And then a third class, or a third drugs, the protease inhibitors, were developed, and you could have combinations with 3 drugs, and this was called highly active antiretroviral therapy. Patients on this therapy didn't develop resistance, and they had remarkable increases in their CD4 cells. And in fact, people that were really almost at death's doorstep improved. They had Lazarus-type recoveries. The death rate seen in orange here fell dramatically, and there was a sense of real optimism that this disease was really on the run. Next slide. And this was exemplified by this cover of Newsweek magazine where they were predicting the end of AIDS. But the story, unfortunately, was much more nuanced and complex than that. Next slide. One of the things that happened is that the transmission of HIV in the country really didn't go down all that much. Even though these drugs have since been found to block transmission, it continues. There's still about 30,000 or so new cases a year in the United States. And this is an area that's the focus of intense work. Also, as people started living longer, what you had was a growing population of people with AIDS in the country. It didn't go down. And in fact, there are more than twice as many people living with AIDS now as there were in '96 when this 3-drug cocktail was developed. And in addition, as people became older, what you had is that the population aged, as shown in the yellow and the orange on this slide. Next slide. So one of the hallmarks of AIDS was that the patients developed, in addition to the opportunistic infections, they developed opportunistic tumors, Kassaye sarcoma and lymphomas, tumors that only occur when there's substantial immunodeficiency. And the development of 3-drug regimens actually was able to markedly decrease the development of these tumors, as shown in the teal colored here. But at the same time, as patients were living longer and patients were becoming older, they started to develop other tumors, some of which occur in partial immunodeficiency and others which are just sort of random tumors that develop, such as colon cancer. And in fact, the number of tumors in AIDS patients has increased since the development of heart. And right now, cancer is one of the top or the top causes of death in people with HIV infection. Next slide. So the National Cancer Institute has spent a considerable amount of energy in developing therapies for these tumors. Our group has been focused in part on Kassaye sarcoma. And one of the things that we've done recently is to show that a drug called pomalidomide, which is an analog of thalidomide, was highly active at treating Kassaye sarcoma. And based on a trial that we did here, the FDA granted accelerated approval with breakthrough therapy for this just this past May. Next slide. So we're now living in the COVID pandemic, and I think it's sort of ironic and almost prescient that this outbreak exhibit is occurring and it's had to shut down because of a COVID pandemic. But looking back, there are some interesting comparisons between the two pandemics. One is that both are spread by asymptomatic individuals, and because of this, both were able to really infiltrate and have become very difficult to eradicate. People spread it without knowing that they're infected. Before treatment, HIV infection almost always led to a slow death. People had to look ahead at years of opportunistic infections and treatments and side effects. And I think to get a sense of that, the book, The Great Believers by Rebecca McKay is a great read to give a sense of what those early days were like. By contrast, most people with COVID recover, although some of them go on to pulmonary insufficiency and death. Unlike COVID, AIDS was initially limited to these specific risk groups, and I think because of this, initially received relatively little public attention. And also because of the different transmission patterns, there are very different public health measures that are needed. And this is playing out today with all the talk about masks and all the controversy about them. And then finally, after 39 years, there is still no AIDS vaccine, but drugs, which were almost an afterthought, have been proven to be very effective at treatment and also stopping the spread of the virus. By contrast with COVID, there are now 2 COVID vaccines that have been developed and have been reported to be highly effective. Next slide. And finally, I think it's important to point out that a lot of the research that went on with HIV has been informing research with COVID, and in fact has accelerated the research in this area. One of the areas in particular that I want to point out is research in developing drugs against proteases. Both viruses have a protease, as seen here. And with HIV, techniques have been developed to do X-ray crystallography, to get 3-dimensional structures of the protease, as you see here, and then to model drugs that can fit into the active site. And you can see that on the left here. The SARS virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID, also has a protease, as seen here. The structure has been determined by X-ray crystallography, and as seen here, there are already drugs that have been developed that can block its function in the laboratory and also block the replication of this virus. So again, this is one of the areas that the AIDS research is informing COVID research. So I think at this point, I will stop and turn it back to Sabrina and the rest of the program, and I'll take questions later on. Thank you.
Yes, you will. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And everyone, please, if you want, start writing your questions, and we will get to them after we have our next talk from Seble. Okay, so, and yeah, hang on, Bob, you can turn off your video. if you like. All right. I'm so pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Seble Kassaye. Seble is an associate professor at Georgetown University. She earned her medical degree from the University of Chicago Pritzker School of Medicine and completed residency training in internal medicine and pediatrics at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York City. She also completed an infectious disease fellowship and holds a master's degree in epidemiology from Stanford University. As a practicing physician, most of her US-based research projects center on providing care to socially vulnerable populations. Her research spans many topics, including drug resistance, long-term outcomes, and comorbidities in women, and prevention of HIV during pregnancy. Dr. Kassaye has also helped develop monitoring and surveillance systems that protect the privacy of study participants. She is applying these technologies to track the spread of HIV and more recently COVID-19. She's applying these, her current projects include a multi-site national study of HIV and comorbidities, including a newly established cohort of young women living with HIV in the Southern US. She's also a lead investigator for a national study that is using convalescent plasma for prevention of COVID-19. And that study is led by Johns Hopkins University. So thank you again, Seble, and please take it away.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and it's really a true pleasure to be here and to spend some time really reflecting on World AIDS Day, which is what brings us all together. I always take this time to really look back, and the beginning of HIV actually takes me back to my youth. And as Dr. Yarchoan was describing to you so succinctly, as he and his generation were actually tackling this problem, I was a young child, and as what we knew about HIV was unfolding in what I show you here in the upper panel on this slide, with these reports that were emerging, taking about 1.5 years for us to fully understand the full spectrum of HIV disease, from the association with immunosuppression in men who have sex with men, all the way to the effect on infants who are born to mothers with HIV. As that was unfolding, I was learning about this in Time and Newsweek articles that my parents received these journals. And so this is where I learned as I was growing up. And it made me realize actually the importance and the impact of the media in any epidemic. And certainly I think we find that to be the case currently. So as this was unfolding, our Dr. Yarchoan and his colleagues were making tremendous progress, taking us from no therapy to the discoveries of monotherapy, dual therapy, and ultimately triple therapy approaches that really achieved sustainable and durable viral suppression, allowed people to recover their immune cells, and allowed people to live really relatively healthy lives, making HIV a chronic illness where people have the opportunity to develop other problems related to normal aging, including cardiovascular disease, malignancies, and others. And so we really now focus on issues related to aging with HIV and the comorbidities that come with long-term therapies. And thankfully, we've gone from this, I always reflect on how many drugs we have available to us. And any of our clinics will have these charts with the different medications, showing the pictures of the tablets that allow us to talk about different exposures patients may have had to different agents, as we recreate kind of people's medical histories. And really for us, the boon was when we started having single tablet combinations that have made it so much easier for people to be able to adhere to their medications, really well-tolerated medications that now people can take a single tablet and maintain durable viral suppression. And so we saw how we went from in 1994, AIDS was actually the leading cause of death in young individuals, 25 to 44 years of age. And so we've gone from requiring literally the cocktail, and actually this picture of the cocktail glass full of pills, I got from the FDA website, which I thought was really key given the history that Dr. Yarchoan shared around the development of so many of these agents, the early kind of what seemed like clashes between the advocates community and researchers, and where we've come to now, which is this one tablet, which is highly effective, picture I got from the CDC website, that has given us the success story of AIDS is not a #1 killer anymore in this age group. And I was doing my residency during this time, and I transitioned between residency and fellowship training to where we had a ward in New York City, where we had dedicated teams for our HIV patients hospitalized, to California 4 years later, thanks to the effective antiretroviral therapy. Most of the management we were doing at that point switched to it's all outpatient, and we had very few hospitalizations related to HIV. So huge breakthroughs. Additional breakthroughs that we had obviously are with the finding that in addition to keeping people healthy, these antiretroviral therapies also, by maintaining durable viral suppression, prevent ongoing transmission to others. And this has been a huge breakthrough. I think it's also given a lot of peace of mind to people living with HIV around any potential risk that they may have feared they harbored with partners. And this has made our lives and our world a lot less complicated when it comes to counseling, and also when it comes to encouraging people to take their medications, no matter how hard it may be sometimes. And so I share with you here where we are now, because I think where we are now, this really is what always gives me pause, because we still have a lot of people who are dealing with HIV. As much progress as we've made, as much as we may think that our work is done, there are still 38 million people living with HIV. We still have 1.7 million people who were newly infected with HIV in 2019. Where this may have been the case, that there's a 40% reduction since the beginning of the epidemic, we still have a ways to go to get to elimination. In addition, 690,000 people died from AIDS-related illnesses in 2019. And so this is something, again, that makes me realize that our work isn't done. We have great tools, but we really need to keep engaged with the community and keep doing the hard work to get us to where we need to be, which is long, healthy lives and few AIDS-related deaths. Our progress towards universal treatment, again, this has been astronomical. When I used to go and visit treatment programs in 2002 in sub-Saharan Africa, most of the treatments that we were, in contrast to what I described to you, where HIV was becoming an outpatient problem here in the US, most of the programs were primarily doing hospice care, really transitioning people to the end of life type of support. And since 2003, with really the tremendous boost that we got from President Bush's initiative, the PEPFAR program, we now have really highly effective therapies that are available globally. And this is very noticeable when you look at the global HIV continuum of care. These are recently released in association with the World AIDS Day. You can see that overall globally, 81% of people know their HIV status, which is a tremendous gain. Testing is a key component of everything that we do. In addition, about 67% of people are accessing therapy, and 59% of people are virally suppressed. And this is out of the total. And when you look at the US care continuum, I apologize, this is a little bit dated. The most recent data I could find was from 2016. You can see that the global progress really mirrors the progress that we've made here. And I'm sure if we had more updated numbers that this would actually look much better in the US as well. The progress in mother-to-child transmission prevention, again, is tremendous. So we have very few perinatally infected children now in the United States. And globally, about 85% of pregnant women are able to access antiretroviral therapy, both for their own health as well as for preventing mother-to-child transmission to their infants. That said, we still have about 150,000 newly infected children in 2019. So some work yet to do, but really tremendous, tremendous progress in the last decade and a half. I think the progress we've made in the US in perinatal HIV transmission since the days when AZT was administered for prevention. We now use triple therapy for prevention. You can see we're down to less than 100 cases per year. And even since 2014, we have a 54% decline in perinatal HIV transmissions. Here in the district, there are years when we go with 0 transmissions. And many times when there is a transmission, it's because of missed opportunities, either a late diagnosis sometime in the second, third trimester, or problems with adherence, rarely due to drug resistance. And so really huge, huge progress. But within that progress, when you really break down the data, we see that there are still disparities in where our success lies. And so unfortunately, when you look at where are infections still happening, African-American perinatal HIV infections are higher in infants born to African-American mothers compared to others. And so again, this points to us areas where we really need to focus our attention to continue our progress to eliminating perinatally infected children. The epidemic in DC, again, another, I believe, heartening story. So our numbers of people living with HIV has gone up, and mostly this is because of increased and improved survival and much, much fewer deaths, which is excellent. The number of our new cases has declined from over 1,300 in 2007 to 282 in 2019, a 79% decrease since 2007. And in particular, I think the risk attributed or the rate of HIV attributed to injection drug use has declined to almost nil with the scale up of a very active and very successful needle exchange program. And so I think those are some of the things that really are key. And our public health department has done an excellent job providing us with really, really good data that allows us to see where we still have work to do. Within that success story, I take these data that were model data from CDC that makes us really think about, well, what is the risk for people living in our area of acquiring HIV? And I really pay attention to this being a provider here in the District of Columbia, where the lifetime risk of acquiring HIV for any adult living in the district is 1 in 13. And that's a really, really high probability. Our neighboring Maryland is 1 in 49. Neighboring Virginia is number 18 here at 1 in 115. So clearly there's some heterogeneity. There's some jurisdictions that have higher risk than others, but this always makes me take pause when I see patients, when I counsel, when I do my work as a clinician treating. I always remember that keeping my patients engaged in care, keeping people with a suppressed virus, hopefully will start addressing this problem. For men who have sex with men, the problem is even more pronounced. It's a 1 in 6 lifetime risk of acquiring HIV. And for African-American men who have sex with men, it's a 1 in 2 chance of acquiring HIV in their lifetime. So there are, again, differences by race, ethnicity, important considerations in any program development, and really key to address disparities and reach out to community and as we do this work. So I think we've spoken about a lot of the successes. So when preventing new cases, we now have very, very powerful approaches. Pre-exposure prophylaxis gives control to individuals to be able to prevent themselves from becoming HIV infected in the event that they're in a discordant relationship, or male circumcision also is successful. Barrier methods help, though they're not always easy. The therapies we've spoken about quite a bit, and HIV vaccine remains elusive. I will not talk about that, but I will show you this, really the pinnacle that we all hope for is an HIV cure. I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Timothy Brown, who is one of the 2 people who's been cured of HIV during one of our meetings. And what he said to me sticks in my head. He has since passed away, but he said, when I asked him what it felt like to be cured, he said, it feels very lonely. So I'm very glad that he was joined by Mr. Adam Castillo before he passed away, the second person who was cured. And many of our participants believe that there will be a cure for HIV in their lifetime. And I hope that that will actually become a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, for your wonderful presentations. So much to learn and think about. And so to our audience, who I'm sure has many questions, again, I remind you, please enter them if you have them. And I'm going to actually ask a couple of my questions to get us started. And I'm going to actually ask each of you a particular question, starting with Bob, if I may. So you were involved in work that identified the first 3 therapeutics for HIV, right? In a relatively short amount of time, it seems, what we had with AZT, DDI, DDC. Is there something to be learned from that? I mean, was that really as short as it seems? And looking to anything that may replicate that level of success today? Could you speak more about that process and how that happened?
Sure. I mean, I think in part we were lucky. It turned out that one could develop drugs to AIDS and to HIV, and a vaccine remains elusive after so many years. But I think there are a number of things that really fell into a place. We were a small group. Sam Broder was the deputy clinical director of the NCI at the time. And so he had his own little lab. It was separate from all the branches and the bureaucracy. And we really focused on this one thing intensely. But Sam could also pull in the resources of the NCI. The NCI had been developing cancer drugs for a number of years. He had the ability to do toxicology. We had groups that could file INDs and therefore do clinical trials. We had expertise in clinical trials. The other thing is that I know that the FDA was really maligned during this process, but they really helped. We were on the phone with the head of the antiviral division at least once a week, often twice a week during this initial protocol. The protocol was written as a 2-week study. And we were able to extend this initial protocol so the patients could stay on the drug for years by amending it and amending it and amending it. And so I think all these things fell into place, and there was a real focused effort. I think everyone had a real sense of urgency at the time. And I think that's what would enable us to do it.
Wow. It's fascinating to think about that.
And I think there is with COVID too.
And it was so interesting to make those links to where we're at now and to compare these 2 viruses.
And also we were able to team up, at least for AZT, with Burroughs Wellcome, which was a major pharmaceutical company that had their own expertise. And they had the ability to do a phase 2 trial and get that order. So everything really fell into place very nicely.
That's good. Yeah, luckily. Seble, I'm curious, more about the connections to COVID. Has the COVID-19 pandemic created any additional obstacles in HIV treatment and care for either directly or indirectly, I suppose, for the patients that you work with?
Yeah. So certainly, I think how we do business has changed, much as for everybody else. A lot of what we do now has become remote. So we are really using telehealth medicine as a way to continue to provide care to our patients. We try to avoid having them come in directly to see us in a clinical care setting to limit risk of exposure to COVID-19. So that's certainly a consideration. And interestingly, you wouldn't necessarily think this, but there are disruptions in supply chain even here. So for some of my patients, they've been getting medications from the same pharmacy for years. All of a sudden, those pharmacies are no longer in existence. So contacting us to re-channel those prescriptions to other pharmacies is something that it's really an eye-opener. And my concern is I'm seeing this here, and what's happening, and this is in the nation's capital, what's happening somewhere else, right? So providing direct patient care, being much more accessible is something that I've found I've had to do, and many of my other colleagues who are providers have had to do the same thing. But what's happening behind the scenes for people who can't reach us and don't have, support to be able to navigate that system. So yeah, all of those things are new and evolving, and how we provide care is also changing. And I think we do need to measure how well are we doing and make quick changes to make sure that we don't lose any of the gains that we've made so far.
Well, I'm also thinking, and for either one of you, if you'd like to address this, about COVID and its, the recent emergence of SARS-CoV-2, which, is the third novel coronavirus to emerge in the 21st century. We're all thinking about what's next, that's certainly not the last. Do you ever think about, and do you have any thoughts on whether or not another HIV-like virus would emerge in the near future and how we would handle that? Either one of you.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a stab at it. If it's an HIV, if it's a retrovirus, I think we're pretty well equipped because there are great similarities among the retroviruses, and that a lot of the tools that we have to fight HIV could be changed over. Probably a lot of the drugs that we have would work. By contrast, what I think we all worry about is some virus coming out of the blue that we really, we're just completely unequipped to handle and have to reinvent everything. I think that's a greater concern right now.
I recall that Barney Frank at NIH, who was part of one of our programs this past summer, he made the comment that it was lucky that it was a coronavirus, that there had been a lot of work done on that, and another viral family would have posed much more significant problems for research. Well, Seble, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're right. I think that obviously things with different modes of transmission, easily transmitted organisms, things that are pervasive in the way that the coronavirus has become, I think are difficult. Things that are transmittable during an asymptomatic phase clearly are a huge challenge for us. We always talk about Ebola virus and how deadly scared we are of Ebola, and I still am.
Yeah.
I always will be. But the fact that that people are not infectious until they have symptoms is really helpful, and we're able to do ring vaccination and have a very targeted approach to our response. And so I think, depending on the nature of the virus, I honestly would like to think that something of the nature of what we're handling now is probably as bad as it can get. And I hope I will never in my lifetime be proven wrong, because it's pretty bad.
And I'll add that, again, that observation when they finally developed a blood test for HIV, that it already had infected 40–50% of these risk groups throughout the country, was frightening. That was like the most frightening medical observation that's happened in my lifetime, that something had just infiltrated. It's like a zombie movie or something like that. And that's what one worries about the most, that there's something that's already passing through and is going to erupt only after it's infected many people.
we are getting a number of great questions, so I will start going to those. And I will add, by the way, I said Barney Frank, I meant Barney Graham there when I was speaking on a previous presenter.
Barney Frank's also been an advocate.
Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got a question from Wendy here, and it's for either one of you. I think it's not directed to anyone. Since HIV and SARS-CoV-2 are so similar, what is the stumbling block of creating an HIV vaccine? I guess given how quickly they've been developed for SARS-CoV-2 in this community.
I mean, I can try.
Yeah.
I can try to take a stab at it. It's not my area. I think there are a number of stumbling blocks. One is that HIV really mutates very quickly. It's a retrovirus. It's designed to mutate. When we developed 3TC, we initially missed its activity because by the time we did the first time point, the virus had mutated within 8 weeks and become resistant. In addition, the main protein that binds onto cells is what's called glycosylated. It's got carbohydrate all over it, and it only opens up very transiently before it gets in. And this poses a number of problems to developing a vaccine. And then also it kills the immune cells, and this again poses a problem in developing a vaccine. But those are my impressions, but I've been lucky enough not to work in that area.
Yeah.
So do you have any other thoughts about it?
No, that's exactly it. It's really that it's, whenever I teach the medical students, I talk about the reverse transcriptase enzyme and how it's so lazy. It makes a mistake every time it does its job. And that mistake is what really becomes a problem for us. Because every replication cycle, the next virus that emerges is a little bit different. And we just can't keep up to get a good vaccine that's good for all. So the diversity of the virus within one person is almost as much as the diversity of flu over an entire season in a country. And so it's just a moving target.
Wow, it truly is. Well, we have a question now actually about therapeutics. Rick asks, a year of highly effective Truvada list price is $26,000 in my zip code. In India, the generic is $72 a year. Can the US improve this?
So, your wish may actually be coming to pass because generic Truvada is coming online. But with every positive thing is a negative, because as you know, Truvada it's great, it works, it's very efficacious, but there's now a, in quotes, safer for bone and safer for kidneys version, Descovy, which is still, the price point is close to that, 26,000. And so Truvada will be available at generic cost. I'm not sure what that cost will be. It'll probably not be $72 a year, but it'll be substantially cheaper. But will we want our patients to take Truvada when we now have Descovy? It's a challenge, right? These things are difficult. And so, the price point for medications is always a huge issue here in the US. The companies need to get the return on their investments, and that's clearly something that's a consideration. But I can't really address the rest of the beauty of capitalism, because really that's what this is. And yeah. I do have to say I'm eternally grateful to all the companies in India, all the other countries that actually in South Africa that make these generic drugs, because that's where the drugs are coming from that are treating the majority of people with HIV in the world. And that's the only reason we can actually afford to keep doing what we're doing.
Bob, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I will. I mean, actually, I think AIDS was one of the first areas where the issue of drug pricing became a major issue. When AZT was first developed, it was priced at, I think, $10,000 a year. And there was a huge hue and cry about this because the government was picking up a lot of the cost. And they said, well, people in the NCI had substantially done a lot of the work developing it, why is it costing so much? And there was a huge patent case that went on back and forth, and it literally consumed a year of my life dealing with this. And the way it had been sort of sent to us under code, the government lost the case. But what we did in the meanwhile was to develop DDC and DDI, so there was competition, and we licensed them to drug firms with a fair pricing clause in it. And the competition then drove down the price of AZT. So, but this was one of the first areas where this sort of played out. And, you know, it's a constant issue. And, you know, you've seen it in the recent presidential debates, the issue of drug pricing and such. It's a major problem.
Yes.
How do you spur inventiveness and yet make things affordable for people?
We have another question from an anonymous audience member. Dr. Yarchoan, practicing your name before we started, mentioned that cancer is now one of the most common killers of people with HIV/AIDS. Are there particular cancers that are more common, or does it parallel the data in the non-HIV positive population?
So there are some cancers that are more common, and the patients are also susceptible to the cancers that anyone gets as they get older. Kappasse's, first of all, we have the cancers that are associated with low immune function, Kappasse's sarcoma, certain types of lymphoma. You've got others that can occur in people with intermediate immune functions, cervical cancer, anal cancer, nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Also, people at risk for HIV are more exposed to certain factors that lead to other cancers. There's greater smoking in people who are at risk for HIV. And lung cancer is perhaps the greatest killer right now of these patients. And the NCI is embarking on a number of programs to try to see how we could do smoking cessation in this population. One of the reasons that cervical cancer and anal cancer are prevalent is, again, because of the risk of these other viruses. And then you get all the other, you know, lung cancer, cervical cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer. Interestingly, breast cancer is slightly a lower risk in people with HIV for reasons that still aren't clear. So it's a whole spectrum of cancers.
Yeah. Wow. You know, just thinking more about certainly what people are facing later in life, you know, with HIV. And now we're learning so much more about the long haulers of COVID-19. I mean, I guess another similarity between these diseases are their potential to have long-lasting chronic, you know, sort of slow building effects. And of course, I'm wondering if either one of you had any thoughts about that, sort of what you know about sort of some of the experiences of people with HIV and what we might anticipate, you know, moving forward with those who have now been infected with COVID-19 or face those risks as well.
I won't speculate on what the long-term effects are related to COVID. Seriously, they're clearly serious and need to be investigated further. And Dr. Yarchoan probably knows better than I that the NIH is heavily invested in trying to make sure that we get some very good understanding of this. And I'm hoping that with the cohorts that I work with, that we will be able to look into this situation for people who have HIV who also become infected with COVID. For patients with HIV, that long-term inflammation associated with the people, you know, fighting against a virus, the immune cells are activated, that does create a scenario where there could be long-term ill effects, right? So could be to the cardiovascular system, could be to the central nervous system in terms of people's neurocognition. It's not uncommon for people who are young in their 40s telling me how, you know, they forget, and they don't have dementia, but there are just certain things that they just don't do as well as they think they should at that age. And we ask people to use different aids to help them. These are things we are studying within some of these national cohorts. What is the effect of long-term inflammation on neurocognition, how the brain functions, how the heart and other vessels function, and clearly also could be associated with the malignancies we see as well. But some of it is the inflammation, some of it is direct consequences of the virus, and some of it, unfortunately, may also be related to the medications that we're using.
Yeah. Oh, it's complicated with those comorbidities and all the rest. Seble, do you have do you encounter any misconceptions or common misunderstandings about HIV, misinformation that you frequently need to address in your work or with the patients that you have?
So I believe there may be some generational misinformation, and I don't know that it's misinformation, but or rather that there may be there's not as much focus in making sure that people are aware, and it kind of has fallen into the back burner that this isn't a major issue, mainly because we're doing such a good job with therapy, so people aren't dying, so it's not omnipresent. So in terms of, generational changes in terms of ways to protect one another, those are shifting. So those are things that for us, we need to keep updated. How people get information is also shifting. And for me, social media is not my thing, but this is how communication goes out there. So we're having to change how we do things to be able to reach the younger generations, I think.
And Sabrina, maybe I can come back to your previous question.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to hear a lot more about the late effects of coronavirus. I think we've been dealing with this pandemic and really haven't focused on it, but I think it's real from what I've seen. After the 1918 flu, there was a number of people that really never recovered and had long-lasting neurologic effects of this. We tend to think of these transient viruses, something you get over and you go on with your life, but they do a lot of damage to cells, and not all the cells in the body can really spring back to normal. So I think we're going to hear a lot more about that. It's certainly one of the reasons, I think a lot of young people don't think that this is very serious, but I wish they take it more seriously, because if nothing else, the potential of these late effects.
Yeah, it's incredible when we think about, this did not exist, to our knowledge
Right.
a year ago. Here we are, but we've got a long, long way to go.
Right.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, unfortunately, because there's certainly more than one left. But from another anonymous audience member, for either one of you, in a recent October 2020 article by the NCBI, it states that the 85 vector being used in COVID vaccines may be potentially harmful to HIV prevalent populations. What concerns do you think this will have, or what are your concerns that this may have in terms of effects on people seeking preventative care towards COVID, while being conscious of HIV, considering that there's not sufficient amount of released data? If either of you are familiar with this study and have thought about this.
Boy, I'd just be speculating with very little information. I mean, I think probably I haven't seen this particular article. I would think the concern might be related to the fact that they have viruses with reverse transcriptase, and if they see an RNA, it could make a DNA copy that could then become integrated into the cells. I think that's the potential theoretical concern. How real this is, I really don't know. And I think any cell making a foreign protein like the corona spike protein would then have other cells that would go destroy it. So I would really hope that this isn't a major issue. I'm sure that the regulatory bodies that are examining these vaccines have a lot of experience and knowledge of retroviruses and can pull in people, and will give this substantial thought before they move forward with it.
I'll just add that I know patients with HIV who have good, good control of the virus are being allowed into these vaccine studies, and so we should have some information within that subgroup as well. So I think that's really very important to give us important information to help us guide and have these discussions with our patients.
That's a good point.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a really good point.
Thank you both for all of this. I wish that we could go on and on, but we can't. So I will just say that it's been such a pleasure. It's been so informative. I learned a lot. I think that everyone did. Thank you to our audience for your really insightful questions. For those of you who have come back from yesterday, and I hope that some of you will join us tomorrow, when we'll be continuing this series, closing this series, where we're going to learn more about how law and policy influence HIV in the US. Our speakers are Greg Millett from AmFAR and Jada Hicks from the Center for HIV Law and Policy. And so you can register for that webinar on the NMNH events page that's shared in the Q&A box. And also you're going to see a survey pop up once you leave this Zoom webinar. And if you please fill that out, if you can, it will help us continue to improve these programs and offer more of these kinds of opportunities and interactions. So with that, I will say, again, thank you to you all. Take care, be well, stay safe, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.